All right. Hello, this is Wmpyr here to talk about what you're seeing right here in front of you. I think it's pretty self explanatory. It says it's from the book Jikundo Entering to Trapping to Grappling by uh, Sifu Larry Hartzell. I mean, it doesn't say Sifu on there, but I think that's what they call him. And this book was published 1984, and these are the four ranges at the time. And as you can see from the book, it says kicking range, hand range, trapping hand range, and then grappling range. So those are the four ranges. I think this is very interesting. Let's compare this to Sifu Paul Vunak, who is active today, still today, and unless he's changed it, from my understanding, when I saw his stuff on the instructional videos from the 90s back in the day, he also had four ranges. But his was, if I'm not mistaken, it is kicking range, punching range, trapping range, which he also said, made very clear that trapping range equals the clinch. And then number four was grappling range. So kind of similar, but kind of not. And I think that difference is very important. Okay, he may not think so. I've said this many times before, but I because I feel like in his videos he said these ranges is just a guide. So that's the way Sifu Paul Vunak treats the ranges, from my understanding. And so he's not really into specifics that way. It's just a guide, to help him teach better or explain better. For me, this is super important. It's not just a guide. I take it very, 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 very serious. I'm not saying then that sounds like he's not taking it serious, but I hope you guys understand the way he's using the four ranges versus, like, for me, I need to define it like perfectly. And in my opinion, I have done that, but yeah, I guess it's just the way that you treat it. So for Sifu Larry Hartzell, I don't know, but I need to go into a little bit of who is Sifu Larry Hartzell, and I really don't know. I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but from my understanding, he is someone that obviously he would be considered a senpai for Sifu Paul Vunak. So I don't know if they've met, but Sifu Larry Hartzell would be the older generation um, compared to Sifu Paul Vunak. Both have directly trained with Professor Danny Nosanto, and Professor Danny Nosanto gave respects to both Sifu Larry Hartzell and Sifu Paul Vunak, and that's my understanding. Okay, and when it came back in the day in the 80s, in the Jikundo official training center, or should I say the Jikundo club back in the day, the one official, right, where they were training there. If I'm not mistaken, there were people that, like, okay, when it comes to the boxing, this guy's the best guy. He has the best punches. And when it comes to the kickboxing and the Muay Thai, we got another guy. That's his specialty. And when it came to the grappling stuff, I believe it was Sifu Larry Hartzell. He was the specialist in that at that club at that time. So, you know, and my understanding here, right? What was the big deal at this time? And I'm thinking it was, we got to kind of look back to the original before this, which was the Bruce Lee era. So back when Bruce Lee was teaching Um, the guy, from my understanding, when I would say that his era, they were going from point fighting to full contact fighting. They were making that transition. And Bruce Lee was in the inner circle for the top North American, USA, right? USA martial artists that competed in the point fighting, and those guys that were making the transition into full contact fighting. So I'm talking about guys like, obviously Joe Louis, Chuck Norris, but of course Chuck Norris was, I don't think he has a kickboxing record. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. But that was the time where they were making that transition. So that was Bruce Lee's time. And so his biggest contribution, one of his biggest, was to encourage that and to help that. Yeah, I'm not saying he was the only one, because he wasn't, but he was definitely on the forefront encouraging that. That and in his case, it wasn't the competing, but it was in the training. He did more of the training of that. And from my understanding, he did do the full contact sparring with the top, athletes at the time. So that's what he was doing. And then on top of that, he was already into what we're seeing, which is he could kick, he could punch, he could do trapping, and he could do grappling. So he was like ahead, way ahead in that sense. So he brought all of that to the table, but I feel like he didn't really organize that area. If you look at the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, what he organized was definitely more along the lines of the stand-up striking, and then he says, you should also know how to, you should also research into some grappling stuff too. And he shows takedowns, throws, and submissions and stuff like that. That's all in there. His illustrations are in there. So, but it's not put together fluidly. And I feel like what this book here does, and what this group, the 1980s group, what they were doing was they were putting it together in a more seamless fashion. That's their contribution. You see what I'm saying? I feel like. So now we go into Sifu Paul Vunak's, and his four is he goes into kicking range, punching range, trapping, and then number four is grappling. So the fact that here trapping hand range is its own animal, right? That is its own animal. In Sifu Paul Vunak's, you can see that trapping equals clinch, which means he's already said it means you got elbows, knees, you got the Muay Thai kickboxing, you got takedowns, you got judo throws. So he's talking about stand-up grappling is number 3. And the trapping. So he's included all of that for his number 3. In here, right here, number 4 is the stand-up grappling. I believe number 4 also includes ground, but number 4 is, you see the difference between number 3 and number 4 is clear right here in this 80s group. Trapping hand and grappling range is it's a separate animal here, just as is number 2 and number 3. The punching and the strikes, I like it how it says hand range instead of punching range. Hand range because they do comes from the Chinese martial arts. They do open hand stuff too, right? The finger jab to the eyes and stuff like that, clawing and all that. So yeah, so I like that it says hand range. But anyway, so for Sifu Paul Vanek, I don't think he cares about that kind of difference, so he just says punching range, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, but number 3 is its own animal, whereas for Sifu Paul Vunak's number 3, trapping range equals the clinch. Therefore, his number 4 is really referring to the ground stuff. So that's the difference right there. And I do think that's a very important difference, and that is also, we're talking about pre-UFC, versus post UFC. And this right here is pre UFC, pre Gracie, pre Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And of course, Sifu Paul Vunak was one of the first people to be training with the Gracies back in the day. So he was already savvy to that. He was ahead of the times. And I think why was he savvy to that? Because of this. Because he comes from this right here, what you're looking at. So even though he evolved this and changed it, he comes from this, and this tells you, and this comes from what Bruce Lee was saying is, hey, you should be equipped with that. So therefore, the grappling was already a no stranger for these guys. So they were ahead of the times for sure. You know, they came from a good lineage in that sense that said you need to have all these skills, and they were good students, so they listened. And then, like I said, in the 80s, they were putting it together more fluid. And then by the time you got Sifu Paul Vunak, then I feel like he had a much better understanding of how exactly is this grappling going to come into play. Yeah, it's all great to sew it together, which is what the 80s group was doing, in my opinion. They were sewing it together. But Sifu Paul Vunak was lucky, in a sense, you know, to train with the Gracies. Like I said, he was training with Hicks and Gracie back in the day, you know, and all that. So he got to see that and experience that early on, earlier, a little bit earlier than the rest of the world. And that, I believe, helped sculpt his perception. Now, mine is different. Mine is, I also have four. And technically, I could have five if you include awareness range, awareness range, and then we'll go into the 1, 2, 3, 4. But yeah, I don't put that in there. But so yeah, I also have four. And the way that I view it is, I don't like dividing kicking range and hand range separately because, like for example, you look at Muay Thai kickboxing. A lot of kicks and punches overlap. And Sifu Paul Vanek has said that, and he's like, you know, he's like, that's why it's a guide, people. You know, that's what he says. But for me, I I cannot ignore that. I don't like that. So I say long range is number one. Number two is medium range. So it's about long range or medium range. I don't care if it's a kick or a punch. It can be done in long range. And same with number two. It doesn't matter if it's a kick or punch or open hand or whatever. It also can be. It can interlap. So I go long range is number one. Number two is medium range. And then number three is what I call close range. Just following the logic here, close range. But I also say what Sifu Paul Vunak says is close range equals clinch. So that's kind of similar to what he says. He says trapping range. He calls it trapping range, and he says trapping range equals clinch. I say close range, not trapping range, you know. And in close range, which also equals the clinch, I say trapping occurs, throwing occurs, um, takedowns occur, elbows, headbutts, and knees occur. So in that sense, it's kind of similar, you know. But my idea of trapping is very different from, I think, very different from most of the world. There's been one or two guys on YouTube that I go, we kind of on the same page. Really, there was one karate guy who's been doing the bunkai, the breakdown, the decoding of the katas, and he's like, look, this is grappling stuff. And he's doing it it's stand-up grappling stuff is what he's showing. And mine is much more similar to that. And then there's, I think the guy was like a British Wing Chun / MMA guy. And what he was showing was trapping in the clinch. Obviously, it's done in close range. So he's doing that. And it's very MMA compatible, and mine is along those the same. We're like I said, we're on the same page. We both derived it. All three of us derived it differently from different backgrounds, but I think we're on the same page. Other than that, most everything that I've seen on YouTube, online, you know, martial arts schools and all that is my yeah. I don't trap that way. I just don't see it. Yeah. I mean, as a teaching tool, fine. To develop basics or whatever, or to get an idea of fine. I'm not debating that, and I'm not attacking the art and the style. No, but for usage, for me to go use it, I don't see it. It needs to be evolved. It needs to be changed. So I really, I don't see them teaching that. So and if they're saying, no, this is how you use it like this, the way we're teaching, then I strongly disagree. So anyway, so and then number four is the ground range. I teach it as ground range. I don't care if it's striking or grappling. It can be done on the ground. I think the UFC has already shown that you could be. You don't have to do working for submissions and positions. You could just, hey, I don't care. You put me in the ground. I'm inside your guard, and I'm just going to ground and pound you. So that's a striker, but it's on the ground. So I feel like the ground is its own range, and the way that I define it is, as long as one person is on the ground, that's ground range. Because you need at least two people, right? You can't just fight yourself. So you need at least two people, and at least one of those people has to be on the ground. So the attacker, the defender, or whatever, at least one person. You could have both people on the ground, but at least one person needs to be on the ground for me to call it ground range. Okay, and they're engaged. So yeah, I divided into those four, and what's interesting is my four comes from Filipino martial arts. So they don't teach it that way in Filipino martial arts, but when I was watching the different styles of Kia, Kali, Escrima, Arnis, I could see like, oh, these guys specialize more in long range. Oh, these guys are medium range fighters with the sticks. Okay, and then when we go to knives, it's like, oh, well, that's a different animal. That's close range work, obviously. Even though it's all connected in Filipino martial arts, but I could clearly see there's long range, medium range, and close range. So that's where I get that from, and I'm just saying that long range, medium range, close range. And then they teach in Filipino martial arts. They teach, okay, so once you're in close range and you use the knife, you cut him, slash him up, whatever. You take him down, and then you finish him. So that was its own animal there, to take him down and finish him. So that's why I say ground range. So I just added the ground range. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Long range, medium range, close range, and then ground range. So I'm just using Filipino martial arts. Like I said, they don't come out and teach it that way, but that's what I saw from the Filipino martial arts, and then that's what I kept. And then when I apply that to other, like MMA, for example, it makes sense. In MMA, I don't really see a lot of fighters specialize or be really, really good in long range, but there's a few exceptions. For example, John Jones. He's one of the guys that uses long range very, very effectively. But most of the time in MMA, it's really just three ranges, which is the stand-up, the clinch, and the ground. That's it. But if you go by my four, it still works with MMA. It works, obviously, with Filipino martial arts because it comes from Filipino martial arts. And so my four ranges will work regardless of style, and regardless of weapon, too, the way that I define it and all that. So I really like my own four ranges of combat, but I do find it important to study, especially the Jeet Kune Do four ranges of combat, how Bruce Lee had it, because he also had, from Bruce Lee's fighting method, he talks about three ranges of combat. And then by the time he gets to the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, I think there's four ranges of combat. It's been a while since I've seen that book, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's four ranges of combat in that book. And then here in this 1980s book, which is now, this is Bruce Lee's, descendants, so to speak, right, of the art. And then, so we have these four ranges, and then you look at someone like Sifu Paul Vunak, active today, and his ranges of combat, once again, it's different. So to see all those differences and to study and why did it change, I thought is fascinating, and I wanted to share some of that with you guys today. So I hope you guys found it interesting. That's it for now. Thank you for listening, and take care, folks.